Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme, exploring bands that we've only had on the channel once before. This one we're going to be looking at today, the band is called Ulcerate, and the last time we had them on the channel was back in 2021. We checked out a track called Stare Into Death and Be Still. This title's a little better, but still kind of in that same area that I'm expecting some really heavy stuff here. It's called The Dawn is Hollow. And if I remember correctly, this band is fairly aggressive in the metallic sound, so these darker, ominous titles kind of fit with that. Let's dive in, see what Ulcerate is bringing to the table today. Ooh, some interesting drum work right off the bat. Pairing that interesting drum work with intense 16th note bass kicks. Nice pre-pulse here. Interesting drum part with keeping that static snare. Oh, I'm glad. I've been wanting to give the guitar a little bit more of my attention, but it's just a wall of sound for me and I wasn't really getting much out of it. So stripping back some of the fuzz is much needed right here. And I like the atmospheric elements to this. The drums keep stealing the show though, man. Those flourishes are tight. And we're still in 3, but the drums are accenting some really interesting parts of the phrase. A variation of the intro. Listen to the guitar over here. It starts out a bit slower and then speeds up the rhythm. Alright, let's get back to the soft stuff then. really interesting schism there between the drum phrasing and the guitar phrasing. Those big drums make me think we're going to get back into the metal, but this should be the song wrapping up, no? Cool. Yeah, I find this to be pretty interesting. I have a tough time hearing. All right, so there's a couple of flavors of death metal, and one of them that I always thought should be what I get into is melodic death metal. But every time I'm given melodic death metal, I don't quite hear the melodic qualities, and I think a lot of that is a schism between me and the music. That I come from a world of, classical and jazz and pop rock, where melody is just such a strong component of a lot of this music, depending on what style of jazz and classical you're looking at. But for me, strong melodies, good hooks, stuff like that has been really prominent. And as I've been introduced to more and more melodic death metal, I think I can kind of see that it's more melodic than normal death metal, but still not reaching the level of melody that I typically prefer to listen to in music. And so I've always had this friction against melodic death metal, where usually it just sounds like death metal to me, but it's kind of more melodic, right? But it's still very clearly death metal. This, I think, is one of the first times that I'm starting to hear something a bit more melodic, a stronger melody quality to the music. But what I find really interesting is that when I begin to look at this and dissect down the composition of it, I don't really see a lot of melody in here. And it's led me to sort of question what it is I'm hearing in this that gives me more of a melodic feel than usual. And I wonder if this is what people get out of most melodic death metal that I sometimes don't. It is this hidden melodic quality, despite the fact that technically there's no melody in here. There's a lot of atmosphere, and that's really what drives the majority of this track. This song is dripping with feeling, with emotion. Every bit of this has an ever-moving harmonic quality to it. The bass and the guitars are doing so much heavy lifting here in building a song that is more than just the animosity of the sonic qualities of it. And I find it to be a really interesting thing that I'm hearing here, because when I listen to the guitars, they're riffing it up. Nobody's really just playing chords over there. We do have chord outlining, particularly when we bring the energy down. We have that dun dun dun. Dun 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 dun. We're playing the notes of the chord, but not all at once strumming the full chord. We're shaping it out. So I guess that is kind of close to a very traditional, foundational style of harmony. But most of this track is riffage. It's just that the riffs are giving us our harmonic information. It's what's building the atmospheric component to this track. And the atmosphere continues to shift throughout the song. At some parts, it is heavy and overbearingly bleak. It has something that pairs well with the intensity of the music, particularly the drums and the vocals and the general speed of it all. And adds into the aggression and animosity of the music with an aggressive and angry harmonic quality. There's sections though that I don't know what it is. It's a mixed negative positive thing, almost something like remorse. I think remorse typically gets classified as more of a negative emotion. And yes, but remorse typically comes from guilt, which means that somebody has had a change of heart from who they were at one time or actions that they made at one time. And to me, that's a positive character arc right there. So a little bit of a mix there. I don't necessarily know if remorse is what I'm feeling, but that sort of bittersweet element where it's not your typical bittersweet, where it's like looking in on the past and enjoying that time, but missing that you can't go to it anymore. That sort of bittersweetness isn't what I'm talking about here, but this is a sort of yin and yang duality of a positive and a negative vibe. And I've been trying to figure out what it might mean to me, and I can't, but it is certainly there at times. There is a very brief moment of almost wistfulness, though. Maybe I heard it was during one of the quieter sections when we bring the energy down. And there's certainly a pensiveness to it. Maybe I just, for a moment, misunderstood that for wistfulness, but I do think it's interesting how much of this song feels like a sort of regret for what is about to come, a wish that things could be the way they were before, but a general anger at the state of things. And I don't know how any of this fits together. We may hit the lyrics and I'm way off the mark, but this is generally how I have felt the different types of emotions that I've gotten on this and tried to form some sort of narrative out of in the musical side of things at the very least. Now, some of this, though, does come down to the fact that this is a pretty densely produced track. I'm not a big fan of that. It makes it difficult to hear all of the nuance going on, but it also creates the weight and animosity that the song thrives within. So I can't really see it any other way. But it did impede some of my ability to connect with some of the more driven sections of the song, at least on a harmonic level. Now, the vocals and the bass are pretty straightforward. I don't have much to add to them. There were some neat bass runs, not just sitting on a pedal note, but for the most part, the bass followed along with what the guitars were doing and didn't have much variation to that other than playing the pedal tone to whatever the guitars were doing. And sometimes this was just playing what the guitars were doing, but an octave down. Pretty typical stuff for bass death metal work. And the vocals, they're harsh, they're aggressive, they're a growl. I think maybe it's a low fry. I don't know, but it's rather static. It's just that one tone pretty much all the time. There's a little bit of mouth shaping variation that gives it a slightly shifted perceived pitch. It's not entertaining to me though. I appreciate the skill that goes into it. There's some music where I think the repetitive vocals work. This one, it just never grabbed me. I think this would have been a lot more interesting if some cleans were thrown in here or if the harshes were a bit more dynamic. But that's just my preference on it. It's not an objective viewing. The drums, however, they're the standout. I mean, the song kicks off with a really interesting drum passage, and from there continues to express these interesting semi-melodic drum patterns. Every single section, even in the quieter moments when the guitars really get to pop off a little bit and I get to hear them while they're popping off, which is a big difference here. And I get invested in the emotionality of the song. And then the drums will do something bonkers and I'll be like, oh yeah, dude, what are you doing over here? You're always entertaining. And it tries to steal my attention at every corner of this track from beat one. I don't usually like to say that any musician should be less technical or interesting. I'm always down to praise phenomenal parts of a track. but I think I found the first time where the drums just, they're too much for the song. Not that I think it bogs the sound down at all, but it absolutely steals my attention in every single part of this track. The rest of the band is just not up to that level as far as interesting writing. I'm not even talking about pure technicality. None of the other instruments, though, catch my attention like they do. And the thing is the guitars, the bass, they have the opportunity to catch my attention emotionally, harmonically. It doesn't have to be shred. Do something that says, hey, dude, you should listen to me. And yeah, a couple of times, sure, but it doesn't take long for the drums to say, doo-doo-doo-doo, hey, look at me over here, look what I'm doing. And it's just, I think it's one of the few times where I would almost say that it veers into the realm of showing off in a way that is detrimental to my experience. Like I said, I don't think it bogs the song itself down, though there are a couple of places where I find a schism between the rhythmic cadence of the drums and of the guitars in a way that isn't interesting in a polymetric way or polyrhythmic way, but actually tries to tear the song apart a little bit. But it is something that just outshines everything else. And there are certainly moments in here where I think the drums deserve the spotlight, but they try to steal the spotlight when someone else is really needing it. The guitars are trying to make an emotive atmosphere in some of these sections, and the drummer's like, hey, dude, I got some spectacle over here. You want to see this? And like, yeah, I do, but you're interrupting this heartfelt moment. You're interrupting this heavy emotion. And I don't know, dude, it got a bit much at times. I just wanted to tell the drummer to calm down a little bit. And I don't bring that up very often. Like I mentioned, I love technical parts, even in non-technical songs. But I think it's overdone just a little bit on this track. And I would have liked it to be reined in just a hair bit. On that note, though, talking about the rhythmic schisms in this, though, I find this to be really interesting. The entire song is in 3/4. At least that's how I would write it. There is a general 3 pulse throughout the track, though. And the drums fairly consistently either work in groups of 3 or groups of 6. What I find really interesting is when they work in groups of 3, and then the guitars will operate in groups of 6, subdivided not in half of a 3 and a 3, but divided asymmetrically into a 4 and a 2. And so the guitars are counting out 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So you have a pretty standard 4-beat phrase, and then almost like a 2-beat extension for a sharp cutoff to repeat it. It creates this feeling of lurching forward unexpectedly by giving you a full phrase and then only half of that phrase. Whereas the drums are giving us this full 3-beat idea repeated over and over. And so what happens is that when we have the guitar 1, 2, 3, we have the drums 1, 2, 3. The drums, though, then go to 1, and the guitars go to 4. And this creates a really interesting schism in accent points, as the guitar is then going to accent 1, which is 5 for the drums, or 2 in this case. And 2 isn't an accent point. So there's this separation where they always come together on the downbeat of every other bar of every 6 beats. On beat 7, they're going to come together. But in the middle, they kind of split apart and go their own ways and kind of do their own thing for a little bit. I actually found this to work a majority of the time. I think it creates some really cool polymetric grooves going on in here. Sorry, polyrhythmic grooves. We're only working with 1 meter, but the rhythms are multiple. And I think that it ends up working well. It creates some interesting rhythmic variety throughout the track and also introduces some interesting grooves towards the end of the song. But as I mentioned, it's not perfect, and sometimes it makes the song feel like it's wanting to crumble. The 2 parts just aren't working cohesively enough to create something stable for the melodies and vocal work to exist on top of. So I don't know. I find this to be a track that is a mixed bag for me. There's certainly parts of it I love. I think that I would love to listen to another track from Ulcerate where maybe the drums fit a little bit better with what the guitars are doing. And I think that's really only, my main concern on it, my main dislike, other than the fact that it's death metal, not my favorite genre. But I mean, still, I think there's a lot of cool redeeming qualities to it, and some things that I would not mind digging into, checking out more of their work in the future. But the drums, they kind of overdo it at times, and they try to steal the show from the guitars and the emotion, and sometimes that ends up being a bit disruptive to the rhythmic qualities against the guitars. So it's got some peaks. There's some good parts in it. It's got some parts I wish they would have not done the way they did it. But overall, I think it's a pretty measured track that tries to explore a few different emotions that all come together and tell a bit of a larger story, like I mentioned, of regret and destruction or dismantling or something like that. A rather aggressive approach and a wish that that wasn't where we were going. So let's dive into some lyrics and see if they line up with what I was feeling out of this at all. The lyricist here has a pretty strong grasp of language. Really good words in this one. It is generally about a decline of life in general into a destructive future. The chorus states the iconoclast separation for meaningless decay, this adornment trivial when we will all burn. The second time it says that we will all burn toward a bitter end. An iconoclast is just someone who attacks a popular or prominent idea or group of people. So we're separating this destruction of popular ideas and separating that from meaningless decay, which I think is interesting to visualize, to conceptualize here, because you would think that someone who is going to come in and create ruin wouldn't have wanton destruction, not a care for anything, but this separation of what they dislike and what is going to be meaningless decay is interesting because it puts import on this other thing here. It isn't just meaningless decay. But then it says that this adornment, this, putting this as a higher priority or separating it out from the meaningless elements is trivial. It doesn't really matter how we segregate the parts of this world that are decaying because they all are. It says that we're going towards a bitter end. The final stanza mentions an unceasing dereliction, unrelenting decline, and that desolation is the arc of life's motion. Talks in general here about things being worse than they were yesterday and a general idea of destruction as being all parts of the circle of life. Although in this case, not necessarily a circle, but it mentions an arc. And I think that this is to avoid cyclicality, that life isn't about destruction and then rebirth, which I think we've seen throughout history a few times. But he mentions an arc, that life began, we reached a high point, and then that high point demands a decline to an extinction of life, or maybe even just humanity. That it isn't a circle, it's just simply an arc. The rest of this track, though, primarily just continues to fixate on these ideas of death and destruction and decay in our future and an impossibility to maybe not even just perceive another future, but there is no course correction available here. It says that we're reckoning with the aftermath of a future left wanting. What once was whole is now shattered into pieces. There's no way to put this back together, and that any future that we have is going to be one where we are left wanting, where things could have been better. Maybe there was even a more positive outlook on things, and people will remember that feeling of knowing where we had been and seeing where we have declined to, wanting for a better time. So I did capture some of this from the music, but I think I had more personal stakes in my relationship to the harmonic side and atmospheric side of this, whereas the narrator seems to be kind of distant, speaking about everything objectively as facts with a bit of distance between them rather than something that they're emotionally connected to. Regardless, though, I think I did a pretty good job, as pulling emotion out of metal is something that I've historically had a bit of an issue with, primarily because a lot of metal just sounds loud and angry to me, and I don't really get a lot of emotional nuance from particularly even death metal. So I think the fact that they got me to feel some stuff in this track is more testament that they're doing something right here from a melodic and harmonic perspective, even if I'm not quite sure what it is they got right. I did connect with it in a way I don't usually with this genre. So yeah, big props to Ulcerate here. These are my thoughts then. The Dawn is Hollow by Ulcerate. What did you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this track? Please put that and anything else you'd like to add into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. My brain failed to get that syllable out. I really had to slur into it. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today, though. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.